Hi, welcome to our very first podcast here at the Arc of Rhode Island. My name is Ken Renaud. I'm the Associate Director.
And I'm Joanna Skokie, the State Director of the Arc of Rhode Island.
We are so excited to bring you our very first podcast titled It Ain't Right. So in our series of podcasts, we're going to be talking about real issues for people that are important in their lives. We're going to be having conversations about disability, culture, inclusion, and what people really want to bring forth and the energy they're trying to bring into their lives.
Absolutely, Ken. It ain't right. There are some things that go on in our world today, in our little state of Rhode Island, that aren't right when it comes to people with disabilities. And we need to make sure that we are protecting their civil rights, we're protecting their educational rights, we're giving them choices as far as housing, and that they get to choose what they want their life to be.
Yeah. One of the things that a lot of times people in our field talk about is, how did we come to do this work? And how do we work tirelessly for advocacy efforts and improving the quality of people's lives? And I can say for myself that I'm in this work because of my brother. My brother Ricky was born with an intellectual disability, and he was born at a time that people with disabilities didn't have services available to them. The only thing that was available to people with disabilities was institutionalization. And my family was one of those families that fought the state of Massachusetts because the state was actually filed for custody.
How old was he at that time?
He was,
That
at
must have
that
been
point,
awful for
he
your
must have been
parents.
5 or 6 years old.
That must have been awful for your family.
It was terrible. And one of the things that we did as a family was say, no, that ain't right.
That ain't right. It ain't right.
You know, my brother, our loved one in our family, was going to be institutionalized, and we wanted him to stay home. We wanted him to be included in society, just like everybody else. That's all we're asking.
So that's interesting. Way back when, people with disabilities just got automatically put into institutions, institutions that were just being cared for, not educated, not given any access to community supports, not really living a life of inclusion. Is that right?
Correct. So there were horrendous conditions for people that lived in institutions. And if you were born with a disability and a doctor, is diagnosing you with a disability, that was the only option available to you.
Terrible.
However, my parents found out, and a lot of local families found out about the ARC.
Isn't that amazing?
Was setting up how to create service provider agencies so that your children could live at home, be included in society, and get supports, education, and earn a living wage and live in society instead of being squirreled away. So my family was one of the first families in the area that we grew up in Worcester County, that started an ARC agency, which is the exact agency that my brother gets services from to this day.
Today, in 2021.
Yeah. So some 60 years later,
wow,
he's still getting services.
So that's what's amazing about the ARC of the United States, and we happen to be the state advocacy office for the ARC of the United States here in Rhode Island. And it's amazing that the ARC was actually started by groups of parents across the country. And now we actually have over 700 chapters in the United States. We just happen to be one of the state chapters for the ARCs here in Rhode Island, but we have the ARC of Blackstone Valley, which is very active and provides supports and services to people with disability out of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So Ken, your experience with your brother and your parents starting the ARC in Massachusetts. What did you what really hit you and made you decide that you needed to come into this line of work of disability advocacy? What was your first act of advocacy?
Well, what's interesting is my first act of advocacy occurred before I was even working age.
Ah,
So I remember hanging out at the local drugstore with, the friends in the neighborhood and my brother, and we all had our bikes. It was back in the 60s. And my brother had this banana bike, they called them,
oh
with a
yes,
long
banana
seat
seat.
and long bar in the back. So this man comes out of the drugstore and he trips and stumbles a little bit coming out of the drugstore. And my brother tends to laugh when he's nervous or he sees something. So he starts laughing at this gentleman, and this gentleman becomes enraged. And he comes over to my brother and he lifts up the back of the bike and flips the bike in the air
Wow.
with my brother.
Wow.
And my brother comes tumbling down, hits his head on the cement walk, and the bike crashes on top of him.
Wow.
And
A little
I
angry?
lunged forward. Mind you, at this point, I'm 6 years old. And I lunged forward.
Was your brother older or younger than you?
He's older. He's
Okay.
3 years older.
Okay.
And I lunge forward towards this man and I say, "My brother is retarded." That was a word we used
Yes.
back in that day. It was not a derogatory term. "My brother is retarded. You can't do that to him." I turn around and my friends are staring at me with their mouths hanging open
Oh.
because at that moment, my voice dropped so low. And from that moment forward, I never lost my voice.
Wow. That's
So
pretty.
standing up for
a
my brother.
6-year-old boy, that was pretty impactful that moment because you still remember it to this day and you're 60
I remember
plus
it to
years
this
old.
day. My brother remembers it to this day. My friends remember it
Wow.
as the moment that I found my voice and that moment that started to really make a difference.
So, Ken, it sounds like you felt a responsibility to take care of your older brother, even though you were 3 years his junior.
Absolutely. One of the my most favorite pictures that I have in my office is right over there of me in a high chair and my brother Ricky feeding me my very first piece of birthday cake.
Funny.
And so at that moment, it's a capture of my brother taking care of me as a kid, as a baby,
Right.
basically 1 years old. And that moment of advocacy where I found my voice, I realized the roles that we have together are going to shift and morph a little bit, where I'm going to be the big brother, if you will,
Yes.
even though I'm younger, looking after him and making sure that he is respected and has the life that he wants.
Right. So, Ken, that must have been a tremendous burden on you as a 6-year-old, and I'm curious how that continued and how it impacted your family. And did your mother and father talk openly with you about advocacy or protecting your brother? What did that feel like? That must have been
It did.
awful going forward.
There were times growing up where I felt, why me?
Yeah.
Why am I a person that has a brother with a disability? But honestly, mostly, I felt like I wanted to be there for my brother and protect him and defend him. I have to say that, as we grew older, that my siblings, even though I love my brother,
Right.
they are not involved.
No,
with
you
his
were the
life.
one that took over that
I
protective.
I took it upon myself to take that over when my parents moved to Florida 20 years ago. So they were not in the same town that we
Right.
grew up in as a family. That I was the one that stepped up to the plate.
Now you're 60 years old, 60 plus, right? And as we get older, how do you handle your feelings of what would happen to your brother Ricky if you're no longer around? because really you are the caregiver. As
Yeah.
your parents aged, they got older, they moved and retired to a different state. Your brother Ricky was still here in Massachusetts. He still has a disability. Disability doesn't go away. We know that. And so, how do you feel now? I mean, it must be really difficult. And this is because this is what we all face as families.
Yeah. What I try to do and I practice is knowing that, and my mother will say this, that if not for me, my brother wouldn't be the person he is today.
Right.
I like to look at it as also from the reverse. If not for my brother, I
Yes.
would not be the person I am today. It's really hard for me to think about if I'm not here and my brother is still here, what would his life look like?
Right.
But I also know that he's grown tremendously as an individual, a contributor to society, and as a man. And he's much more capable to make decisions now and speak up for himself
Yes.
about what's important. So that if people do something to him or something happens to him, he's able to tell people, where
Right.
he didn't do that before.
Right.
My mother will say these days, your brother talks a lot. He
Right.
never used to do that.
Right.
It's all those things that you've done with him over the years, Ken, that has helped him find his voice.
And we're going to talk about that. Like what happens to when the caregiver gets older or is no longer here. We have some wonderful speakers, experts in this area that are going to talk about all kinds of things and how to prepare for that. Because our families, it's laden with fear. Fear, guilt. Am I doing enough? Have I done enough? Am I good enough as a mother? Am I good enough as a father? Am I good enough as a brother? We all feel those feelings to the point where it can get pretty
Right.
hopeless.
I think in giving a really clear example too to people is I've always wanted to move to a warmer climate. We live in New England.
Right.
It's not, like I don't like the winter. It's cold. I want to move to a warmer climate. I have not done that because if I move to a warmer climate, my brother is here.
Because of Ricky.
And then what happens with my brother on holidays,
Right.
his birthday, those events that we've created together as tradition, like going to
Concerts. You
right?
tell me about going to concerts with your brother a
So
lot.
if I'm not here to do that, it doesn't mean that I can not travel back and stuff, but it's not going to be the same that I'm here and I'm here for him and he knows I'm here for him.
But boy,
all my
the
other
power,
siblings
the
live
power
other
of
places.
love in a family
Right.
for your sibling or the child that you care for is pretty damn amazing.
Right. But what's interesting to me is that when I say that to my friends out loud, and I'm brave enough to say that to them, they say, but Ken, you've got to live your life too. And I think a lot of times we as family members might not live our own lives.
We
Like the way
absolutely
that
do
we
not.
want to live them.
We absolutely do not.
And that, that is an act of love.
Right.
And it is. So I guess I struggle with that. I struggle with how do I create that balance for me? That I'm realizing my life ambitions and my goals and my dreams for myself, but I'm also helping my brother realize his dreams, his goals, and his vision.
So
for
it's
his
no
future.
different. You're a brother,
Right.
but just think about parents,
Yeah.
how impactful that is. I mean, I knew when I couldn't understand what the heck I didn't know what was happening with my child. I couldn't figure it out. They told me I had a bad child. He was a terrible kid. He was emotionally disturbed. And yet there were times at home where he was totally perfect. It was really all centered around school and what was going on in school and being around other people. And I didn't know what autism was, so I didn't understand it. And I was looking to the professionals in the schools to help me.
Right.
And yet I really didn't get the help that I needed when he was a child. So it was only when he was 9 years old I discovered that he had autism and dyslexia. And then going to the school and begging them for help with my child was almost,
Right.
it was demeaning. It
Right.
was being dismissive to me that I didn't know what I was talking about, even though I had medical reports from doctors. I received no support. And as a mother, that guilt of that mom guilt of, oh my God, I'm ruining my kid. My kid, there's something wrong with me. There's something so wrong with me that they're sending him to a therapeutic school when he didn't need to be in a therapeutic school. He never needed that. What he needed was somebody to recognize, yes, I have autism. I have to be treated a little bit different. I have to be given an individualized education. And for me as the mom, I was devastated, hopeless. I lost who I was. I had been a successful business owner. I had been a successful legislator. I had been involved in all kinds of organizations, and I led, women's business groups. I did it all when I was young. And when I had this child in my in my 40s, it all disappeared and I became a non-person. And that is devastating. I mean, there were times that I sat in the car as he was trying to jump out of the car and keep him safe. We would be driving on a highway, 95, and he would try to jump out of the car because he didn't want to go to school. He was that fearful of school because by that time the trauma had really set in. It had been years, right? This started happening in early child care, in a preschool, where he didn't want to go and he didn't want to walk in the door and he couldn't stay and he was hysterical and fighting and biting and kicking the teachers and me. And so it got to the point where by the time we got up here and I was begging the school, please, please help me. There's got to be a way we could do this. Can we meet him outside of the school? Can we slowly introduce him to go into the school? And they had an attitude of like, well, you get your kid here to school and we'll educate him then. And that was basically what they said to me. So it was dismissive of me as a parent, dismissive of my son's education or care for my son. We had a couple good teachers who would come to the house and try. They weren't even supposed to do that. That was against school rules, but they would do it because they realized what a hard time my son had. And so they would come. But there were times where I was driving my car and I would just look at a telephone pole and say, you know what? It'd be easier. I just crash into that telephone pole right now because I don't know what to do anymore with this child. And me. I lost who I was. The core essence of who I was gone.
Yeah.
And if you could just imagine, I was in sweatpants and sweatshirts and, just trying to make it through the day. It was everything just to get dressed in the morning and start the fight all over again from day to day to day. The only time my son was happy was on a weekend.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. And, as a parent, you're human, so you react. I would get mad at him. I would yell at him. My husband would yell at him. You couldn't help it. And yet you were so lost.
Right.
And you knew this kid needed help. And we needed help. And yet no one would take the time to figure out what was going on.
It's such a life experience that you've had, and how you were just able to, even though you felt
I was gone.
one step in front of the other, and that's the best you could do in that moment, in that day.
As a matter of fact, I use that saying. It's something from my church, and It said, I'm doing the very best I can at this particular
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
And it was hard to say that to myself. And there were times I didn't say that to myself. And I was so down and so depressed. I was going to a therapist for myself. I always recommend, to my families that they do go to a therapist because you need somebody to get all these feelings out. You
Sure.
can't keep them to yourself, or you'll basically do what I did to myself, which is start to destroy yourself little by little.
Yeah.
From the overwhelming guilt, the overwhelming failure as a mom, the overwhelming failure to your family, because my children, the two older ones, they were older, but it still impacted the family when there were these, we used to call my son the tornado. He would have meltdowns. And if people are familiar with children with autism traits, that's a very typical thing. It's a meltdown. And it's hard to describe.
Yeah.
But he would crawl into little balls, into
Yeah.
a little ball, like he was trying to go back and hide and get away. And all these adults that I thought knew about children with autism, now I know from being in this field for so long that they were doing absolutely the wrong thing, which is getting on top of them, dragging him out of the house by the foot, dragging him into school, scraping his legs on the macadam at the school, throwing him in a 3-sided little walled paneled room and then locking the door and leaving him in that room while my husband and I sat outside in the car and we could hear him screaming outside
Right.
for get me out of here, get me out of here. Really, I only families who have had to advocate and to really go through this and raise a child with special needs really knows how it impacts the family emotionally. It affects the siblings emotionally. It affects you financially. I couldn't work. All my time was dedicated to making sure this child was safe.
Yeah.
I could not work. And then when the school would just tell me, oh, well, you get him to school and we'll teach him, there were times I couldn't even get him out of the bed,
Right.
or put the socks on. He had sensory issues. He would wear the same clothes. To this day, my son is an adult now. He has this sweatshirt that he spent, I think it was from second grade all the way up until actually ninth grade, where he would chew on the cuff of the sweatshirt. And he would chew and chew and chew. And he wore that sweatshirt every freaking day. Sorry, I don't mean to swear, but every day. And he would take that hood and hide
Yeah.
at school or hide wherever we were.
Sort of like a security blanket.
Oh, it definitely was.
Yeah.
He would hide. And that was one of the things that he had to overcome.
Right.
So the way I got into this educational advocacy is really learning how to advocate for my son, having to spend the money, enormous amounts of money on an advocate. I mean, there were times that I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch, breakfast, and dinner because I made sure that my attorney got paid before I was able to do anything else. I made sure that my son's therapies, the copay was paid so that I could make sure that he did that. I spent money on gas, driving to Providence, Bristol, where else did we go? Warren, to make sure that my son got the proper therapies. I spent money on social emotional programs, which back then I didn't know it was a social emotional program, but I learned all about this. And that's why after my experience with my son, I said, it ain't right. This is not happening to other families. This is criminal education, criminality, because these children are so left behind and so left out of it that I said, it's not going to happen. So that's when I embarked on this third career, shall we say, of my lifetime, and became an educational advocate. And really, I speak my truth. Some people don't like me. I'm extremely passionate. I'm extremely fierce when it comes to protecting a child's education and what they should be getting by federal and state law. They are entitled to an appropriate education and an individualized education. So I'm very fierce about that. And I challenge school officials all the time. I challenge parents all the time. I challenge therapists all the time to make sure that I'm going to advocate for that child like it's my own kid.
Right.
Because I was not able to save my kid. I didn't have the knowledge or the expertise early on to save my child earlier. And I will go to my grave with that regret and guilt. And I don't want any other parent to feel that.
And what's really fascinating to me as a listener, and you opening up about your experiences with your son,
I'm going to cry.
is that, and it's okay, because this is what we as family members and parents go through. We end up becoming the experts.
Yes.
That educate the professionals
Yes.
about what is best for kids with needs,
Yes.
with special needs and disabilities. And what I hear, and I wish I could change that for you, is that you feel like you failed.
Oh, of course.
You did not fail.
Of
You
course.
did the
but
best. I want to go back to one
Right,
of the
every
things you
parent
said.
feels that way.
Right. But you did the best that you could do, and you kept moving forward, even as difficult as it was.
Oh, and I was frozen at times.
Right.
I was paralyzed.
Right.
I mean, literally paralyzed. I couldn't write the next email. I couldn't pick up and make the phone call, even to my own attorney,
Right.
to say, this happened today. What am I going to do? How am I going to handle it? We have to call another IEP meeting. We have to call another meeting. I would have a meeting, 2 meetings a month with the school, and yet nothing was being accomplished. It was just delay. Well, we don't believe he has dyslexia. We don't believe he has autism. He's just fine here at school, Mrs. Skokie. I don't know what your problem is. And they turn it around on you. It's called gaslighting. I know that now. I had never known what that word meant. But it happens. It happens every day. It's still happening. It happened back in the 50s. It's still happening today. And it needs to stop.
So we need to, moving forward and looking at the future, it's all about culture change.
Yes, absolutely.
And increasing the public awareness of what is our shared life experience as family members, and what is it that we struggle with moving forward, and that we are immobile at times because of fear of doing the wrong thing. And one of the great lessons that I've learned in advocacy work is that we do become the experts in this field, like it or not.
Right.
We're in it.
And you have to trust
And
yourself.
we continue to be in it. And that family members and people with disabilities and the community can be a resource to each other.
Yes,
That
absolutely.
we need collective wisdom, the wisdom that's available to us as a group, to make really good decisions.
So what I call that is strength,
Yeah.
right? It's family strength. It's
Right.
family numbers. It's parents who know or feel or have a gut that something's off, right? It's just like Megan's Law.
Right.
You know, a family might feel like something's off with that person. I better get my child away from them. You know, they don't know what it is, but they feel something's off. So they protect that child. So we have to trust ourselves as parents that we know what our child needs. Even in education, I mean, I used to look up to these teachers and say, oh, she has her master's in this. She has all these fancy letters after her name. I'm telling you, fancy letters after somebody's name don't mean anything
Right.
because you are with your child. You know what your child needs. And somehow you've got to communicate that with the educators. But here's the rub, they have to be open to it.
Mm-hmm.
The culture is so closed in our public schools, and they're so used to doing things the way they've done them for 50 years that nothing has changed. Families still encounter all the obstacles. They now maybe one family, won't uh, encounter obstacles, but if you ask any family with a special needs child, they encounter obstacles when they
Mm-hmm.
go to the school they're entitled to by federal and state law and ask for assistance or for an individualized education program or for testing or evaluating their child for a disability. It is the school's responsibility and duty under federal law to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I can't tell you every day we have calls and calls of parents calling our offices and saying, I don't know. I don't know what to do. What can I do? I've asked the school for the last 3 years to test my child, and they keep saying no. Oh, he'll catch up or she'll catch up, blah, blah, blah. So, what I would say to the parents out there is trust your gut. Seek out the answers. Seek out the answers from professionals. When I started educational advocacy here in Rhode Island, there was one other organization. There was no educational advocates in Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
I had to hire somebody from Connecticut. There were none.
Mm-hmm.
So, I made sure that I went to William and Mary Law School for educational advocacy. I made sure that I learned the law. I made sure that I read cases at 12 midnight, 3 a.m. or whenever. I make sure that I stay up to date on what's going on, especially with the recent, our experiences with COVID,
Mm-hmm.
because everything changed. Schools were really struggling. Now, I don't make them out to be the bad guy, and I don't really mean to do that. It's just my experience have not been good experiences. But there are great school districts, and those are the ones you never hear about. Or there are school districts who've had enlightenment and they're coming around and they're starting to understand what parents are talking about. With that being said, there's still a lot of work that schools have to do
Mm-hmm.
for parent engagement, for providing a child with disabilities everything that they can do, for teaching the other children in the school about inclusion and what a disability is, what it looks like, and what we should do to accommodate and give them the same opportunities as those children. And so what the ARC is doing is we're going into schools, we're working with schools, we're explaining to them what the issues are for families. We're being the family voice when the family voice is so distraught that they don't have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Families don't have a voice any longer. And we make sure that an individualized education is developed correctly and targeted towards that child's needs, and that it is carried through, and then he is offered all these other opportunities that he's entitled to by law again, because people seem to forget that.
Right.
And that bothers me. People seem to forget that. We have a duty to take care of our vulnerable children. And we have to make sure that they get the supports and the services, whatever those might be. It might be a motorized wheelchair. It might be learning ASL, American Sign Language. It might be given a communication device. It might be taught specific evidence-based instruction,
Mm-hmm.
as in dyslexia, not just given whole word instruction as our schools moved years ago. It used to be phonics. Now it's whole word. Now we're trying to move it back to particular evidence-based. We're teaching reading skills
Right.
for children with dyslexia or other learning disabilities, math disabilities.
So there's definitely an added value that the ARC Rhode Island offers to schools,
Oh,
families,
gosh.
and in our conversation today, what really strikes me is that, we talked a lot about advocacy efforts. What's it like for family members? I've done a lot of work over the years with individuals with disabilities, and having those open and honest conversations with them about what has this been like for you. And just recently, uh, talking to a student, a young man that I've been working with him and his family in Amherst for 4 years, you know, we were watching this podcast about disability and people with Down syndrome, and they asked the question, "Do you wish that you weren't born with a disability?" And his answer to that is, "I wish I didn't have this. It
Wow.
does make me different than everybody else. And I understand that. But I also know that I have a different view of the world. I have a different way of looking at things that I want people to know about the way that I see things, the way I see the world, the way I can see myself contributing back to my community and help empower
So,
people."
what do you attribute that to? The family learning about disability and learning what their rights are, your work with that family?
It's all
How
of
do
it.
what do you attribute to that young man saying, "Yeah, I wish I didn't have a disability," and I can imagine my son saying that. "Oh yeah, I wish I didn't have dyslexia, but it's done this, this, and this for me."
Right. It's to me, it's really making the time and space to have conversations with people, to develop a trust and a rapport first, and help them identify what's important to them in their lives. What are they trying to bring forth in their life?
And why do we do
And
that?
and
Let's so let me throw that out because somebody would say, "Why do we even do that? What do we care? What do we care? Why do we care?"
I care because I see that when we do that investment of time, and this is not just me
Right.
investing my time, it's families like yourself and others investing their time and resources, it's schools investing time and resource, it's communities and connections and stakeholders investing in this individual to be successful. And people can be successful. They can
Yes.
contribute to society in very impactful, important ways. I'll give you a great example. When I first started working with this young man back in middle school, and we talked about what are his gifts and talents and capacities, he lives on a farm.
Right.
So he said, "Well, I farm, Ken. I'm a farmer." And I said, "So, where do you think you could bring that gift in your community? Who would welcome that gift?" And his answer was, "I want to grow food for the homeless."
Right.
Wow.
Out of
I mean, this
nowhere.
is a kid in middle school.
Right. Right.
And how amazing is
Yeah.
that he
We
sees.
underestimate these
And
kids.
we have to understand that helping people understand who they are as a unique individual in this world and on this planet, how they can better
Right.
society. And, you know, you, some of this stuff, we can't write it. It's unscripted and we learn as we go. But the important thing is for all of us to move together and bravely go where others won't go.
Right.
And that is the purpose of this podcast, is for us to have real meaningful conversations about culture, inclusion, disability, and how we all benefit when we all accept each other in society.
Right. Our aim in this podcast, It Ain't Right, is to highlight some of the things that need to be changed in the disability community, whether it's for children, uh, early intervention, K to 12, youth that have graduated or are searching for employment, or adults in group homes or searching for employment themselves. So we want to highlight those areas so that we can start to work on the culture. And what we need our audience to do is tell other people about this podcast, subscribe to our newsletter, go to our website, help give a contribution. It doesn't matter whether it's $1, $5, or a monthly contribution, or even more if you can afford it. But we must protect our people with our family members and our community members who have disabilities. We can't just continue to dismiss them or say it's not important that they don't have a job or that they don't have options for housing on their own. Each individual, even those with disability, want to live, they want to work, they want to be creative, they want friends. Friends is one of the things I hear all the time. I just want some friends. And the ARC Rhode Island has created some programs in the last 2 years as part of a response to COVID that we're putting people together that would have never met. And because of that, they're dating, they're becoming friends, they're texting outside of our regular meetings, they're building relationships with each other. They're learning how to navigate life through some of our programs that we put on. How to deal with the mom and dad who might be a little bit overbearing or overprotective, how to articulate what their wants and needs are. So we need you, the audience, to listen. We've got lots of experts coming up on family matters, therapies, new experts in inclusion, in schools and education and adult life and housing choices and employment choices and employment programs. So we need all of you to really engage with us and stand with us and say, it ain't right, and we're going to change it. And so you can go to our website, which is www.ri.thearc.org, and support the kids that we work for and the young adults that we work for and the adults that we work for.
And I think it's a good time to take this opportunity to thank some of our funders that have really stood behind us in these difficult, critical times. The Rhode Island DD Council, the Rhode Island Foundation. The other people that have helped us along the way is definitely the ARC of the United States. We would not be here if not for them. Realizing the efforts and what is needed to make a state office in the state of Rhode Island run and be effective. And I think I mentioned
Rhode
the
Island
Rhode Island
Foundation has supported us with funding for our different COVID response programs, and we would encourage those who share the same values as we do to join us in this fight to change the culture, improve the way services and systems are delivered to people with disabilities.
And I don't want to forget the individual donors that, come
Very
along
generous.
with us. They step up to the plate, and as we say, just come along and achieve with us.
Right.
That's what we're all about.
I'm Joanna Skokie. I'm the state director for the ARC of Rhode Island.
My name is Ken Renaud. I'm the associate director here at the ARC of Rhode Island, and we really look forward to having more impactful, critical conversations and having some fun, all learning together.